It is April 10th, 2020, Good Friday, the day when we gather to extinguish the candles and hear the nails be pounded. We gather here on the traditional territories of the Anishinaabe and the Attawandaron, the Huron and the Wendat peoples, where for generations upon generations we have heard people and governments in conversation to hear the words to seek truth and reconciliation. This year, where we hear the words of peoples and governments amongst COVID-19 pandemic, where we hear the words, stay home, physically distance, be safe. And today we remember the words between governments and peoples from the time of Jesus, where the words rang out, crucify him, crucify him, crucify him. And this joint service between First St. Andrew's United Church and Metropolitan United Church, let us gather for this time of worship in solidarity and in partnership as we receive this call to worship from the Reverend Dr. Jeff Crittenden from Metropolitan United. Let us worship God.
Come to the garden, come to the hill, come to the place of reflection. Come to the cold room, come to the condemnations, come to the seat of judgment. Come to the mountain, come to the cross, come to the place of the skull. In the name of Jesus Christ, we come. As his disciples, as his people, we come to remember and to worship our God.
We read from Matthew's Gospel, where we hear the story that tells us when they had sung the hymn, they went out to the Mount of Olives, and then Jesus came to them and said, "You will all become deserters." And Peter said, "I will never desert you." And Jesus said to him, "Truly, I tell you, this very night, before the cock crows, you will deny me 3 times." And the first candle is extinguished. Then Jesus went to a place called Gethsemane, and he said to his disciples, "Sit here while I go and pray." He took with him Peter and the 2 sons of Zebedee and said, "Remain here and stay awake." He went a little further and threw himself onto the ground to pray. And later he came to his disciples and found them sleeping. And he said to Peter, "Could you not stay awake with me for just 1 hour?" Jesus went away for a second time and prayed, "My Father, your will be done." And the second candle is extinguished. Jesus stood before the high priest, and he said to Jesus, I put you under oath before the living God. Tell us if you are the Messiah, the Son of God. Jesus said, You have said that I am. But let me tell you, from now on you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of power and coming on the clouds of heaven. And the high priest yelled out, after he had ripped his clothes, He has blasphemed. What is your verdict? And they answered, He deserves death. Peter was in the crowd. The young servant girl came to him and said, You were with Jesus the Galilean. But he denied it. And he said, I do not know what you're talking about. Then he went out onto the porch and he saw another girl who also said, You were there. You were with him. Again, he denied it under oath and said, I do not know this man. After a little while, the bystanders came up to Peter and said, Certainly you are also one of them. Your accent betrays you. And then he began to curse and swore an oath, I do not know that man. And at that moment, the cock crowed 3 times. And Peter, remembering what Jesus had said, went out and wept bitterly. And again, the light was diminished. When morning came, all of the chief priests and the elders and the people conferred together against Jesus. They bound him and led him away and handed him over to Pontius Pilate. When Judas saw that Jesus was condemned, he repented and brought back the 30 pieces of silver. And he said to the chief priests and the elders, I have sinned. And they have said, What is that to us? Go and save yourself. So he threw down the 30 pieces of silver in the temple, and he departed, and he hanged himself, and the light diminished more. Now at the festival, the governor was accustomed to releasing one of the prisoners when the crowd had asked for it. At the time, they had a notorious prisoner called Jesus Barabbas. And so, after they gathered, Pilate said to them, "Whom do you want me to release? Jesus Barabbas or Jesus, who is called the Messiah?" And the crowd yelled out, "Barabbas, Barabbas." And Pilate said to them, "Then what shall I do with Jesus, who is called the Messiah?" And the crowd yelled, "Let him be crucified." And Pilate said, "Well, what evil has he done?" But they shouted all the more, "Crucify him, crucify him, crucify him." And the light went out. They flogged him. They stripped him. They mocked him. They took thorns and wove them into a crown and placed it upon his head. They spat on him. They took him away to a place called Golgotha to be crucified. With a taste of vinegar upon his lips, these words were said, "It is finished. It is done." And the lights went out.